It's great to be here. About 5 years ago, I was in the room over there with a lady by the name of Carrie Newman. She was running an event. It was like 4:30 in the morning or something ridiculous. It was like one of those early breakfast events. Well, at least it was when I left home. I probably started at 6:30. From that spawned a whole series of events around the country, about 1,000 people at networking events all around the country each month. And there was no name for the event. It was just a word-of-mouth thing based on an idea of giving. Years later, there was a book called The Go-Giver produced. It was just about the same idea. It was all about what you give to a community, knowing that you're not necessarily going to get directly from that community, but you'll get something out of it, and it'll be word-of-mouth or reciprocal in some way. And we've run and worked on that basis probably now for 10 years with different businesses, my wife and I. 3 years into taking on that sort of philosophy after taking on board a coach, we had ourselves an unusual opportunity in terms of our financial position. And I want to talk to you a little bit about where things are at right now, because 10 years have gone. We're in a very different place right now. And this guy here, it's almost holographic, isn't it, on this wall? It's like a picture of Buckminster Fuller. He's a famous architect, but he's probably more known for his crazy writing, and it was a bit like what Mark was talking about with me. This guy would write prolifically about random things that no one would understand. Years later they would go, oh, that's what he was talking about, right? So he's written a lot about business and around how communities work, and this could be referenced in terms of architecture, but it's actually the reality for all of us. There's a whole heap of forces in industry and culture and change that are happening right now because of technology, partly, but because currencies are heading towards what's more human is the reality of it. Buckminster Fuller says, don't fight the forces, use them, in a book of his called The Shelter. And this was like, in the 30s. That was about 17 years after the American government decided that public schooling and forcing kids to go into a very specific, fixed mode of learning because they needed a workforce for the Industrial Revolution. I'm not sure if you know that. That's how schooling started, particularly Western schooling. It wasn't actually about giving our kids a great opportunity. It was about setting up a workforce for the industrial, magnates, the handful of people that became billionaires, okay? So what we have now is an unusual turning point. It's a legacy where we've gone from agrarian industry to industrial, and now from industrial to connection economy is what a lot of people are talking about. It can be used in lots of different ways, and people who talk at this forum use a whole heap of different references around where we are at right now. What's interesting about this chap is he was talking about ideas that we're dealing with right now, a long time after he was thinking about them. He knew that this is where it was going to go. It was going to come full circle where there was more population than the need for jobs, and technology was going to come to the point where it was so automated that industrialists would make money either way. They don't need to provide the jobs. So we're kind of in that place now, don't you feel? And there's a whole new economy there where people are having to choose themselves. And that's kind of what's happening here. So Brendan from Nexus is a great example. Someone who's deciding to just make the connection economy work for him and bring other business people together to find new opportunities that otherwise he probably doesn't even know exist yet, And when he tells his story, he's probably going to talk about a number of different opportunities that he's put two and two together and made business from because he's decided to make the connections work. Does that make sense? So that's kind of what I want to talk about. And you don't need everyone. You just need a handful of people that agree to your idea. But what you do need is passion that your opportunity, your idea, the thing you're interested in is worthy of your time and worthy of other people. You don't need everyone to agree to it. And there's lots of examples of this, but if you are after public opinion and everyone to agree with your idea, it's not going to work. I can tell you now. And now more than ever, you're going to get feedback. And the feedback's going to be all contrary to what you expect, and there's going to be a small group of people that are hardcore followers, okay? So if you look at someone who does the Ironman, they'll pay $15,000 just to go into it, to wear a little red cap, and they probably don't even like swimming, but they just want to be around those group of people and to say that I was an Ironman, right? I would love to do that. I'm not going to do it, right? But there's a few people that I know that have done that recently, and it's really interesting hearing how painful their experience is. But it's about association. It means something to those group of people, and it's in a way it's a connection economy. It's a network. Within that, there's a lot of opportunities that have come for that gentleman. But you don't need everyone, and not everyone's going to become an Ironman as well. So it doesn't matter so much. But what's very interesting is a story that happened in architecture recently with a famous architect. Her name's Zaha Hadid. She's actually won a competition in Brisbane to produce a building. And in Japan, she won recently the stadium. My background's in stadium architecture, and so when you're working with stadiums, there's no such thing as a great stadium from a financial outcome point of view. There's no way to put money. You actually don't ever mention money, right? Because it's a financial black hole. So that's one economy, though. What it isn't, though, is it's a great addition to identity for a city, okay, and for a country. If you think of Stadium Australia or whatever it's called now, the naming rights are a big thing because people want their name associated with it, and they buy naming rights to stadiums because it means something to a people. Now, I don't know that there's anything between New South Wales and Queensland, but apparently, some states around the world and some different countries have different things with each other, and they have a little bit of banter around different sporting opportunities. But because of that, cities want identities, icons, and all sorts of different things related to that. So Zaha, unfortunately, when she won that stadium in Tokyo, every single architect on the register, male and female, but most of them are male, so there was like 16,000 something petitioned against her winning the stadium. And it's not because a Japanese architect didn't win it, it was because of her cultural background and that she was a woman. Now that happened very recently, in the last couple of years, and it's shocking. And the fact that it was a public petition and those people had their name associated with it, and you can look it up and Google it, it's remarkably shocking. Now, it tells you a lot about where things are heading. It's like, you know what, if you've really got something to say and you've got a really big opportunity and you've really done a great thing and someone picks you even, it's not going to be a popularity contest, okay? Now, what she said was that it was just sad for them, right? Because they haven't moved on. They think it's a popularity contest and they just, they've missed out on the opportunity for a job, yeah, sure. But we are not in the Industrial Revolution anymore where we're waiting for people's approval. We actually go do it anyway. Whatever it is that we're fascinated in, whatever it is that we think is important for our family or the future or our state or whatever it might be. So this is the kind of categories. There's agrarian. It sort of happened up until about 1917 when governments and, more importantly, industrialists who owned government power decided they needed a workforce that was reliable. When the clock was ticked on, they were there. When the clock was ticked on, off, they were, out of there. They basically earned what they earned. They were productive. It's a productive workforce. It was reliable, regular, and there was a shortage of good workers. That became the Industrial Revolution, so that's roughly ending now. What's interesting is it actually is the beginning of the connection economy and it is overlapping. That's just lucky, because we could be in a position where they didn't overlap, but I think wherever there's a gap and a need, humans tend to be very creative, okay? So that's kind of the connection economy. Now, where that leads, who knows? Now, this guy here on the left-hand side, he's a famous Japanese architect, probably one of the most famous Japanese architects, Tadao Ando, and he heads up the body of architects and the competition who, gave the award to Zaha there. It's an amazing thing because I think he knew the backlash would be there, and I think partly the reason he wanted to put her in this position is that he wanted to offer a change of state in terms of the marketplace. He wanted to give them a bit of a shake-up, okay? Because he knows that if that culture is going to get anywhere and be anyone for anything in the community or the Industrial Revolution going to the connection economy, they need to change, because otherwise they are not going to catch on. It's not an imperial state anymore, So she just says it's embarrassing for them. She's an amazing woman. She's very, very, very tough. But she's got a small team of people. She can do that and beat a huge legacy of hundreds of years of research. So when you think about what can I do, where the connection economy is relevant, you need to be thinking about your offering, whatever it might be, as a gift. Now, everyone has these. I'm going to talk about 6 pillars. Not pillars that I come up with. These are pillars of research that lots of people are working in, and you'll hear lots of researchers, and we're just talking about someone who's going to be doing a talk next time around the connection economy, a part of it, and trust and whatnot. But it's merely your turn to give a gift. That's what's happening. That's the opportunity right now. Now, that gift might be another connection, it might be another idea, it might be an invitation to an event like this, it might be running or hosting an event like this, it might be putting 2 and 2 together and creating a whole new industry that didn't exist before. We're seeing that with application development. We're seeing that within the schooling industry. We were speaking about that before. Rip off and duplicate seems to be a great way of doing that. We're talking about how Queensland's ripping off and duplicating some content from Victoria. Not that they'd admit to it, probably, but... and another idea here is probably where it all starts. It's about coordination. So without you being here and without Brennan deciding to coordinate this event, there would be a lot less value here. Because he decided to make a step, he created value instantly, without capital, just an idea, just a few conversations. It's just an email, just a broadcast of a, hey, it's like a beacon, okay? Now, not everyone's going to turn up to an opportunity. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter what that number is. For everyone, for everything, for every idea in business, there is a series of numbers that it will take for you to have a connection and an offer and a delivery in terms of the right client. And that doesn't matter what that metric is, as long as it's an important project, and I'll talk about some that come out of this environment. It'll all come down to creating something from almost nothing, okay? Now, what are these currencies that are developed? These are the pillars of the connection economy, according to some speakers. There's a lot more than this, and there's a lot less than this, depending on who you talk to. It's a bit like change management. There's like 500 different models. They all kind of work, but they all have to do with connection and reinforcement, and which is kind of the beginning and the end of this as well. Coordination. So what Brenda did here is exactly something anyone can do, and it's something that is very valuable. So you look at a P&F, P&C, whatever it is, in a school, it's very valuable. It can do a lot of amazing things. You look at in Coorparoo 10 years ago, there was a lot of people who say that they were involved in making this new project happen in Coorparoo, where I come from, but it was actually this little old lady who ran a health food store, and she coordinated a little group of people, of business owners, that hadn't been done for 30 years. Some of the older guys that had been in business in the area for a long time remembered that community, and they, said, well, hey, we've done this, we've tried that, didn't work. She said, no, it's going to work, I've decided already. I just want to see if you're in on this, right? Now, this is a tough chick, right? Great woman. Now, she basically made a multi-million-dollar investment happen 10 years later. Now, she's not even in business in Coorparoo anymore. But she knows about it. Every time I take a photo of its development, I send it to her and say, hey, you started this, I met with a developer recently who thinks he knows all about how development happens in Brisbane, and he was telling me all about how this development happened. I said, no, you got no clue. It was this little old lady in Coorparoo. So don't listen to media. Media is telling a story from one perspective only. Media no longer controls you or I. We create media, and we decide where it's going to go. For the first time in history, media magnates, which that guy probably looked like before, Bucky Fuller, I think someone said he looked like a media guy, they're no longer relevant. They no longer have the stronghold on power, politics and money, okay? And the reason, because, is we're all human, and we're actually heading towards these human currencies which you and I control. And we create from nothing, just like that, just an idea. So coordination is a very, very important one. And if you wrote these down as like new economies that you can create from nothing, you'll get business from that. As long as you back it up and you're in environments, because they reinforce that small group of people that believe that's true, okay? And so it keeps it alive. Trust. A lot of people speak about trust at our events. Mike Wilson speaks about the Speed of Trust, which is a book by Stephen Covey Jr. Great book, for sure. His second book after that, which verifies and adds more depth to that, it goes beyond trust a little bit, is very important. And this is why I say this is just a list and an opinion, because opinions are like, there's a lot of them. Trust, however, is a mainstay. Everyone talks about it, and you'll hear more and more about it. Now, trust happens from experience and relationships, and you add trust when you refer someone something, because you're adding uniquely an experience, a relationship, an opportunity, a value proposition you've done in the past with something. You've added value to someone's project. When you ring them, they're waiting for your call going, hey, what's next, right? So when Brendan rings, I'm thinking, what are you doing now, man? Because he's always doing something. And I love that. It's exciting. It adds energy from nothing. When you're having those days where you're just flat, or someone's told you what they think of you or whatever, and it's really no one's opinion to share, but they do it, and then you're a bit flat, but someone calls you, and then you just know it's going to be a great conversation. You want to be one of those people. They add so much value to the conversation in terms of the connection economy, and it's a free currency. Permission. You give someone permission to access a network, to develop a network, to have a conversation, open opportunities, break down barriers, break down regulations, break down communication barriers or previously held convictions. You're giving other people permission. Permission is a great thing that you have control over. Permission to have a conversation about something is a very valuable thing. And this can go, if you're thinking about this for a business, or you're thinking about this inside a business, or thinking about this in a marriage, same thing. It all works. an ideas exchange. So we are all here either in business or working for someone else, and what we're doing here is creating a platform for participation, which Rob Neville often talks about, which is basically an opportunity to exchange ideas. Now, an exchanging of ideas used to be, I'm not going to tell you my idea, I'm going to keep it to myself like it's my IP. That doesn't exist anymore, right? It's all about sharing it because all of us are smarter than one of us, right? And so the idea will always be better because of someone in the room, right? No matter how big the quorum is, as long as it's more than one, okay? You're doing good. And that's an exchange of ideas. Now, when you create platforms where an exchange is freely made and people are open to opportunities, you get better ideas than you brought to the opportunity. If you look at lots of forums where people run technology platforms, so people run hosting platforms where people can communicate, Google Hangouts, all those sort of things, there's meetings where people meet physically to talk about Google Hangouts. Did you know that? Why is that? Because face-to-face there's an extra level of trust, there's an extra level of permission given instantly, there's an opportunity to give more exchange of ideas, it's breaking down barriers. So interestingly, the human connection and running events physically is becoming more and more a real thing. If you wanted to check out something in terms of where the retail market's heading, Westfield's still making a lot of money. Why is that? Things like Amazon, who said they would destroy companies like Westfield, and some of the big American ones, are actually thinking of having retail outlets. So if you wanted to look at Google something that's worth reading, there's something called the Four Horsemen, right, of the internet, and it talks a little bit about that. So generosity. Generosity is something that, when you meet someone that's like stingy, okay, that's the opposite. So if you think of anything else, that's generosity. Now, the reason when you laugh is because you know the stingy ones and you don't like dealing with them, because they're tired, stingy, and you feel like the bargain's always going to go their way, okay? The generous one, you always feel like you're going to win. Like, you always feel like you're going to get more out of it than they gave, and you feel like, and there's a trade that happens. If someone's in that position and they're giving you those opportunities and you feel like you're getting more out of the deal, there's always a reciprocity there. There's a currency made from nothing. You always want to give back. Even the stingy ones want to give back to people like that, right? So it's an amazing thing you can do from nothing. And it could just be the generosity of listening. I will speak to someone, Rob's very good at this, speak to a stranger and get their whole life story because he's just the first person that's really listened and engaged and not judged them. Okay, that's generous, okay? So that's an example. It doesn't have to be money, it doesn't have to be time and resources, it can just be simply a letter, whatever it might be, or listening and feeling like, having that person feel like they've been heard, okay? It's very generous. And art. So art is maybe, these are the two very most human elements of the whole connection economy. These are two things you cannot do without, and you can create from nothing. Your idea, so whatever your idea is, that's the art part. It can be, even if you're in IT and you're dealing with like technical support, you can do art, right? I've seen some pretty creative solutions, right? But it's not about so much art like architecture and paintings and whatnot. It's actually about what you contribute to the world. So what's uniquely about you that made the difference, okay? It can be anything. It could be the fact you listened in a certain way to a certain person at a certain time. It's a very generous thing to do, but it's actually an art form because you decided to do that. You could have decided not to. So you're an intrinsic part of that process. That is actually an art form. By definition, there's people like Seth Godin who uses these categories, and he speaks quite highly of creativity in communication. So we're all have connection machines, and they're probably best not used for angry birds, but used for actually connecting to people. This is very funny because we've all kind of done that, where we've looked at what else could we download that would be more entertaining than listening to this conversation. You might be thinking about it now. So that's partly shutting off. That's when you're deciding to not contribute to the connection economy, right? Now, what's interesting is years ago in the 30s, there was, I've just been reading lots of books from people back then just thinking about their mindset. And there's a famous series of aviators that happened around about that time. They were all women in America. And there was, they call them the 99s. That's where the 99 thing comes from with women. It's a powerful force when you get 99 women in a room and they all want to be aviators in the 30s. It's like, a pretty powerful situation. They literally moved political persuasion, because when they got together they changed everything. When they were disparate, they could only communicate by telegraphs like Western Union, things like that. When they got the opportunity to actually use telephones and things beyond like those very awkward fax-like communication techniques, they jumped on it and they ditched this thing that they loved and they loved to communicate with. So we thrive on communication technology, and the more of it, the faster it can get, the more interactive, the more real, like one face-to-face it can be, the more we want it. That's why the communities of groups are still very, very important. And what happens is that we actually find people wanting to bring other people because they get something that's a different level of value that they do not get often at their office with someone who's paying to be there to communicate, but also something they don't get on Facebook. Okay? That's not to say Facebook's not valuable, it very much is, and it may be better use of your time than Angry Birds for sure. That's a very blurry image of a couple of guys from Papua New Guinea. Rob, who's here, is working on this project with his brothers. It's not a project that I come up with, it was always a problem, right? So wherever there's a problem that someone saw, they could make a lot of decisions based on the pillars of that I've just shown you in terms of the connection economy. You can come up with some different ideas and different opportunities here. Now, Rob and his family have pioneered a Western way of looking at, how to treat people in Papua New Guinea. That's probably the best way I can describe it. And Rob's dad in particular gave a lot and sacrificed a lot to make that happen. So their family name's worth a lot in that country, so they have a lot of influence. What could you use that influence for? Well, it could be used for lots of reasons, right? But what's interesting is they're using it to make a difference for these people. So if you look at every 6 weeks, there's almost 400 kids that die. They're kids. I mean, the numbers just say they're people. But if they make it past 20, they've figured out what not to have in terms of water sources. But typically they're younger ones. And this is from the head of Oxfam in NZ, and talking about this is a major problem because it's very close to our borders, it's a real problem, it's a very large number of kids. If this happened in Australia, it would be considered an epidemic. Yeah. Now, we don't even hear it on the news. This didn't even make, this was a press release from Oxfam, and it didn't even make media at all. This was the last you'll hear about it. So if you Google search this is where you see it stop. This is why you can't trust media. It's because they don't actually have people's interest in their interest. If it doesn't serve them in any way financially, you do not hear it again. So this is partly why we, 10 years ago, got rid of our TV, and 3 years after that, we had a very different financial outcome. We stopped listening to the experts, okay? And just started following people who were very generous, focused on the connection economy before it was a connection economy. Because it's a real thing. It's about humans. We were like this before. We actually did like communicating. We just have more platforms for it now, okay? And now we actually need to do something about it. Previously, and I would say even just as long as 10 years ago, there was an economy based on a scale of industrialisation, and that's changing. For these kids, they're never going to see that. It's never reached them, right? And all they are is like numbers on an Oxfam chart at the moment. But people like Rob's brothers are communicating with people like the Gates Foundation, and different people like that to monetize ways to get water purification, filtration and education to kids, which is primary medical care really. There's a lot of other people that we're sort of getting involved in that conversation, but Rob's personally invested a lot of money in terms of water purification for kids up there. But it's actually about education. If these are fluoro lights, which I'm assuming they are, if you just held a bowl of water under a fluoro light, it's a lot of UV, it sterilises water. Now there still might be a stick and stone in there, it's not going to get that out, but it's going to kill the bugs that kill the kids. Okay? Now most of these kids have these fluoro lights, they just don't know the two. But it gets, it's like amazing. All their parents don't know about it. So it's about education. And I think the connection economy, for most of us, we're just like these kids. We're either going to not change and not agree with this or not believe this is true, and we're going to suffer for it, or we're going to go, maybe there's something to what that guy was talking about, and do something about it. This is an event which a couple of friends of mine run Atma Yoga in the CBD. They run a networking event for Latin Americans that are doing business in Australia because they studied here, they had family here, they wanted to just stay here and do business. They run large events. That's quite a large event. It's getting quite serious once a month. Now, to add value to that community, what we've been discussing is what really makes a difference is people like you, people who aren't Latino American or Spanish speaking or Portuguese speaking, that are Brisbane based, that have Brisbane strong networks, who are generous enough to want to connect with these contacts. There's a lot of opportunities in there, and a lot of examples have been things like mining opportunities in South America, a lot of cross-international business that's been done because of relationships that are existing. So these people are willing to give up and create economies of scale that are a part of those 6 pillars of the connection economy, and they're there every month looking to meet people to do business with. What's fascinating is there's probably thousands of business development people around Brisbane, and they just don't bother to go out on a Friday night. It's an amazing thing. But so put a 50-50 room together, and it's amazing what happens. If it's slightly biased to having too many Spanish-speaking people in a room, all that happens is dancing, and which leads to other things. Apparently that's 8% of the UK GDP, what happens after that, which, funnily enough, they wanted to keep off the books until they realised how much it was, which is really interesting. So that's kind of a connection economy in itself, but that's been around forever. That's kind of why we're all here. So that's really, so there's things that are very, very human, very, very real, and we all know they're true, and that's kind of why we giggle about them. But in business, as with everything else, and with employment, and Mark's an expert in this, we often need course correction, we need guidance, and we're limited by our own worldview. And I guess that's the biggest opportunity I think that exists for all of us, is what can we learn from each other's world experience. We were talking a little bit before about Turkey. One of the professors of architecture I really liked was a Turkish lady, and she was amazing, made a big contribution to this community here, but the university didn't really respect her, so she decided to go back to a country that understood what she was offering. And what's amazing is she makes a really big difference and big impact in that country because there's people that just bother to listen to her. It's amazing. We missed that opportunity. Australia missed that opportunity completely. I blame QUT, whatever. I didn't know better at the time, but knowing what I know now, I could have seen 1,000 people that I could have referred her to make that difference. And what's interesting is that could have just been a course correction. Someone suggested it, or my business coach or something might have suggested it, and I might have been able to put those two people together and make it happen. So there's things, course corrections. So if you look at a rocket going to the moon, it'll make constant course corrections. It's almost 99% of the time never on track. Okay? So when you're feeling like you're not on track, which is like 99% of your life, right? And your boss tells you you're off track, that's okay. You should reward that because you're actually moving somewhere. What's not good is if you're not moving somewhere because you can't be steered. You're just a stationary object. Well, sort of. You're going backwards, right? So one of the things that stops a lot of us is we're waiting to have our turn. Okay? It's not about that. This new economy is not about being picked. It's about deciding to go somewhere, often the wrong way, but then working with the community and steering the ship, getting back on course. Now, that also means you need to have a destination in mind because that's a very important part of a process in terms of a journey, something that you need to look at. There's still a place you need to decide to go, otherwise you're just moving, and that's kind of irrelevant. So that brings us to the final point I want to talk about, which is in terms of the connection economy, the real part you bring is where you choose to go. Because when you choose to go somewhere, when you choose to make a difference, when you choose to change your family's future, when you choose to do something different for your kids, when you choose to invest in a certain type of company, not a certain other type of company because of where they invest their money and what that's about for the future, when you choose to buy a certain type of phone, you live in a certain suburb or whatever it might be, choose a certain car, everything's a choice, but to what end? You need to decide what you're here for, what will make a difference. And it's quite an interesting thing, but most people never decide what it is they're here for. They don't decide, or design their own life. They think it's all by chance and it's a bit of luck. It's actually not. When you speak to that lady who decided to do those things in Coorparoo, she knew she was the one that decided. That is there because she decided to make that happen. That was a very tricky project. It was amazing, the backstory to that. I could spend 5 hours telling you how that happened. But it comes down to this question, and this is a very personal one, and it's an inside job. You need to contribute this part. All the other stuff you can learn. But you need to decide what a life well lived looks like to you. Now, I can tell you for sure you're going to be off track and it's going to be wrong, whatever you're thinking now. But when you look back, the constant search for this is your job. You bring that to the table. When you get fired up about what you're bringing, what you're doing, what you're going to be about, it doesn't matter what other people think. You want to pull around you a group of people that will reinforce that. You want to get other people around you to kind of verify what your thinking is. You want to read things around that. If you decide in 10 years' time that was the wrong decision, you'll be a lot more intelligent, you'll be a lot more well-read, you'll have a bigger network, you'll have a lot of opportunities, you'll have, whenever the next idea comes to you, you'll have an opportunity to actually commercialise that with a network of contacts that you built for a completely other reason. There's a lot of other things you'll get out of that, but one is just to be moving. On its own, it doesn't do it. You need to be going somewhere, and you need to do it with counsel and guidance and whatnot, but deciding to go somewhere is the biggest missing in Australia right now. If you wanted to just look at, okay, what other opportunities are there, just decided to go somewhere. That'd be massive. And decide to go somewhere that you really want to go. That's all I really wanted to say in terms of the connection economy, which Brennan asked me to talk about. But these events are a prime opportunity for me and my family for the things that we want to do with our communities, and are making a really big difference in terms of a lot of businesses. We're commercialising them in many ways. It's been a great revenue stream in terms of other business, future business and whatnot. Ideas now that we have that we're adopting, we just didn't even know existed before. In fact, we're cooperating with people who are direct competition with who we were with 10 years ago. It's amazing, so you never know what's going to happen out of an opportunity like a small group of people in one team, a golf club or country club. Is it golf club or country club or both? I don't know. Is it the same thing? Okay.
I think the country club has died. So
right. The bar's closed, so that changes the name. I don't know. Anyway, so that's kind of like very important to us, and we know it's very, very, very relevant to everybody. It's just what are you going to do with those sort of opportunities? But because when you look at the connection economy, when you're face to face with a lot of other people, that's it. That's where your opportunity is to add value in